Hello and welcome to the FatBoss Guide to Thok the Bloodthirsty 10-man normal in the Siege of Orgrimmar.
We've got a dinosaur with us, Lawrence.
This is my favourite encounter.
About fucking time.
It is the best encounter in here,
Really?
apart from Grosh. Yeah, I fucking love this encounter.
Fair enough.
This is the only boss in here that I absolutely adore. Okay. It's so good. Anyway, let's start off. So this is a two-phase encounter that your raid team needs to work to determine what phase you're in. It's pretty clever. That's why I like it so much. So for this fight, you want to bring 1 or 2 tanks, 2 to 3 healers, and a mixed DPS makeup. Now, the reason why you want to bring 1 or 2 tanks is that there is like a constant stacking debuff on the tank. However, this only happens in phase 1. So if you decide to keep phase 1 short, you only need 1 tank. And there is like not that much healing. If you have very little phase 1s, there's very little healing to go on. So you could only bring two healers.
So really, you could go with a 7 DPS makeup if you really wanted to, if you wanted to push it hard.
Now, surprisingly on this fight, DPS that don't cast are stronger in phase 1 by a large amount. However, ranged DPS are much stronger in phase 2. So you might want to weigh that up depending on which way you decide to deal with this encounter.
Then we're going to go straight into it with phase 1, and this phase, he's very angry, Lawrence. He's shouting a lot, I know that for a fact.
So what the tanks need to worry about in this phase is the stacking debuff called Fearsome Roar. Now this is a frontal cone physical damage ability that deals around 200k. However, each time you're hit by this ability, you do gain a debuff that increases the amount of damage you take from this ability by 25%.
So it starts really hurting after a short while.
About 4 or 5 stacks, you really want to tank swap or go into phase 2. Or use loads of big boy cooldowns.
Now, another general thing that the boss does is something called Tail Lash, and the boss will constantly, if you're behind him, he'll stun you. It's pretty much the old dragon mechanic, never be in front and never be behind, which is very, very true for this boss. So just make sure that you aren't behind him, otherwise you're going to get stunned and you're going to do a lot of damage. So completely, just don't go near him, for God's sake.
The boss will also occasionally shock random players, dealing around 100k damage each to them. There's nothing you can do about this, you just need to heal it up. It's something to keep in mind though.
Now the main ability that the boss does during this phase is Deafening Screech. Now when the boss reaches full energy, he'll cast this ability, dealing large physical damage to all raid members. Now any players casting when this ability goes off will be interrupted for 2 seconds. So it's like an interrupting jolt or any other boss ability that just
it's basically a mini interrupting jolt. It does less damage and it doesn't interrupt you from your school for very, very long. Now every time he does successfully cast one of his Deafening Screeches, which is at 100% energy, his energy regeneration speed is increased, making this ability come in more and more frequently. The more they go off, the more they'll start coming in. Now every time a player does fall beneath 50% health, they'll receive a debuff called Bloodied. Now if 5 players with this debuff are within 10 yards of each other, this will trigger Thok to enter phase 2. So this is how you decide whether or not you want to enter phase 2. If you stop healing and let people eventually drop to 50% health, that's when he will then enter phase 2 and he'll stop spamming this Deafening Screech ability. However, you do not want him to enter phase 2 too many times because of certain abilities that he'll then gain that then cross over into phase 1, which you'll understand a bit more in the future. So really, while you are in these phase 1s, if you're using 1 tank, you need to make sure that you don't stay in there too long because eventually he'll just die because of the Fearsome Roar stacks, but you don't want to leave it too early. And this phase really is the best time to use healing cooldowns. You should try and make it last as long as you possibly can, as melee will love you because melee don't really get affected by the spellcasting interrupt, whereas ranged DPS in this phase, especially when it starts speeding up, can't really do anything apart from insta-casts.
Now we're going to move on to phase 2, so once you have decided, we're going phase 2 now. Now one thing to note in this phase, the boss's movement speed increases, and it doesn't seem to have like an obvious cap that we could see necessarily, so that's something to take into account.
Now any player near in front of the boss during this phase will be either eaten or just squashed. It's just an insta-kill mechanic, so in this phase you need to make sure you're definitely not stood in front of the boss. The boss will no longer target tanks in this phase, and instead will pick a random target and fixate them. Now the fixated player has to kite the boss away from the raid, running either north or south, whichever area has more space. Now the fixate cast doesn't last too long, and you do have plenty of time to move away, to start with at least. Now once the fixate cast is finished, the boss will then recast fixate on another player, and then that player needs to kite the boss in the opposite direction. One thing to note, which really fucking sucks about this boss, this is the only complaint I have, is that the fixate can be cast on the same player twice.
Yeah, so you can run out of room, and then you could just be complete dinosaur food, which is sad.
But yeah, I don't know if it can happen a third time, we never found that, but it did happen twice, and yeah, that pretty much caused that player to die, so that really sucks. But if it does happen, you're going to have to do something. Just move on your feet, think of an idea.
Yeah.
You'll probably die, to be honest. But yeah, so the whole point of the fixate targets is just to kite the boss up and down. While this is going on, you can still DPS the boss, and it's very, very important that you do. So, with the boss's movement speed increase, eventually he is going so fast that you can't really kite him anymore. He'll just instantly eat people. You need to try and get back into phase 1 as soon as you possibly can, because as soon as you go back into phase 1, all the fixate speed increases will drop, and it'll just go back to normal. Now, the only way to go back into phase 1 is by getting Thok to eat one of the prisoners that are on either side of the room. Now, as soon as phase 2 starts, a jailer will spawn. Now, this jailer needs to be picked up by the tank, and the tank needs to keep in mind that these do hit fairly hard. And any DPS that are, like, not really good on going on the boss, such as, like, melee DPS, because if the fixate goes on the melee DPS and they're right behind the boss, they're just going to get eaten straight away. So really, you want your melee DPS to kill these. Now, when the jailer does die, he'll drop a key, and you want one of your tanks to pick it up. Now, with this key, you can go over to one of the 3 jails. There's one on the left-hand side, there's one in the top right, and there's one in the bottom right. Now, when you open up the jail, after the boss has finished doing his fixate on his current target, he will immediately fixate one of the mobs that was in the jail, and then the encounter will go back to phase 1. However, whenever the boss does eat one of these prisoners, he will gain the abilities that that prisoner had. Now, we decided to transition the boss after about 10 fixates, but if you decide to use movement speed increases, there's no reason why you couldn't keep going for more, but it can become quite dangerous. And this is like the perfect phase, because there's very little for you to do apart from kite and DPS the boss. So this is a really good opportunity for you to get as much DPS out on the boss as possible, because some of the abilities that the boss gains from each jailer he eats are quite nasty, so you don't really want to deal with them for long periods during the fight. For the first phase 2, what we did at least, you can decide whichever jailer you want to kill, but the one that we decided to kill first was the jailer on the bottom right hand side, which is Water Speaker Gorai.
Now, once he has eaten our poor friend Gorai, it will actually replace his fearsome roar with freezing breath. Now, this makes it so each time he does do a breath, it puts a stack on the tank that once it reaches 5 stacks, you'll become ice tombed.
Now, these ice tombs have around 1 million health, so they die very, very quickly. However, having an ice tomb on the tank is bad, especially if that tank is tanking the boss, because he's just going to get floored because he can't use any of his abilities and he can't dodge or parry or anything like that. He's essentially stunned. So really, you don't want the stacks to ever go to 5. So again, it's, do you want to bring 1 or 2 tanks? How long do you want phase 1 to last for? That's what you need to work out.
Now, also, his random AoE damage that he does is also replaced by a move called Icy Blood. Now, this also still does do random damage on the raid. However, it does also add a stack, and once again, once this reaches 5 stacks, you're ice tombed.
Now, this is completely RNG, because it does attack random players, and if a player does get turned into an ice tomb, just kill the ice tomb. That's all you can do about it.
So that's what happens when he eats Gorai. So he's eating Gorai, he's all done that now, so now he's back in phase 1, and he has all these new abilities. Well, it's replaced his old abilities, so you just need to keep going as far as you can. If you've got 1 tank, then you need to transition it quicker, or anything like that. So you still transition it in the exact same way by having 5 people or more with the bloody debuff on them, by being under 50% health, all within a 10-yard range of each other, and then completely transition the boss. So it will depend if you whatever setup you bring, but otherwise just try and push it for as long as you possibly can, and then you'll go back into phase 2.
Now, this phase 2 is exactly the same. However, this time you now want the boss to eat the left jailer, which is Arcalic. Now, Arcalic will do the exact same thing as Gorai, except that the Fearsome Roar will be replaced with an Acid Breath, which is a very high nature damage cone, and the debuff it applies is a 20% armor shred that also stacks. So you want to keep that in mind. It does really fucking hurt. You want to really save your cooldowns for this, but the most irritating thing it does, the random AoE damage on the raid is replaced by something called Corrosive Blood. Now, not only does it hit harder than the previous 2 random AoE abilities, it will also play a dot, and this dot stacks every single application. This dot can be dispelled, so it's important that you do dispel it. The dot seems to apply slightly quicker than the healers can dispel it.
Yeah.
Which means really you want to try and bring 3 healers, because then that does allow you to dispel it as quick as you possibly can. Now, you can use a Shadow Priest to master spell it, and obviously if a Boomkin does use Symbiosis on a priest, you will get master spells, so that's there's other ways around it, but generally you want to dispel this buff as quick as you possibly can. So you then want to repeat phase 1, dealing with the new abilities, and then you want to enter phase 2.
Then we've got our last jailer that we want to sacrifice to Thok, all hail Thok, and it is War Master Montac. Now, once again, the breath and the random AoE damage will be replaced. Now, the breath will be replaced by Scorching Breath. Now, this does 200k fire damage in a breath, followed by a really nasty, hard-hitting dot that does stack.
And the random AoE damage that you take is replaced by Burning Blood. Now, this is the main reason why you do this guy last, because this Burning Blood, not only will you take the random burst damage from it, but you'll also leave a patch of fire underneath you that ticks very, very hard. And this comes in so frequently that there's fires everywhere, which completely prevents your raid from being able to stack up to heal, which means that your last phase 1 needs to be like as short as possible. That's why you want to try and drag all the other phases on for as long as possible.
Of course, once the damage does become so high in this phase that everyone does become bloodied and it transitions into phase 2, he's got no one left to eat at all. So really, this is going to be your last phase 2. If he's too high at this point and you don't manage to kill him, you're going to become dinosaur food no matter what you do, or at least squashed by him. Yeah. So it depends on what you like more, to be honest.
And also to transition him into this like last phase is so difficult when people are spread out because of the fire. Because obviously you need to be within 10 yards of each other for the bloody debuff to actually work to transition the boss. And because everyone's all over the place, just getting into that last phase 2 is very, very difficult. So that's the order which we used. I wouldn't really recommend changing it. You could change it so you do the poison one before the frost guy, but we found that this order worked for us and there's no reason why it wouldn't work for you. Just the key to the fight is just keeping the phases as long as possible, but doing it safely. You don't want to push it too hard, otherwise you're just wasting cooldowns and wasting time. And ultimately, the enrage might creep up on you.
So thank you guys for watching. If this guide helped you out, then please do give us a like. It helps us out a lot. And make sure to comment, rate and subscribe.
And if you'd like to see more 10-man guides by FatbossTV, please do click up on the annotations you see on your screen now, and it will take you straight to those videos.
Thanks for watching.